prime ministers who are in trouble quite often like to go and strut around on the world stage. It's actually a more comfortable arena for them than back in domestic politics. But look, Starmer's still in dreadful trouble.
What they may also see is Keir Starmer at the Munich Security Conference. I made the point that Keir Starmer may survive because he's actually quite good at these foreign affairs jaunts. He'll be meeting with European leaders at the annual Munich Security Conference. And of course, at last year's conference, even if you don't know what the Munich Security Conference is, you'll probably remember this speech by J.D. Vance marking the beginning of the US retreat from Europe.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Well, there you go. That was an incredibly annoying speech given a year ago by J.D. Vance. I'm pleased that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is going to be leading the US delegation this year. He might be a little friendlier. But there's everything to play for, isn't there, Michael Binyon, at the Munich Security Conference? You're a former diplomatic editor. This Munich Security Conference has become a very, very big deal, particularly, obviously, given the security situation in Europe and around the world.
It has indeed, yes, and it's where not only military people but strategists and statesmen and others get together and look at what's happened and what's going to happen. And it was remarkable that it was at this very conference, I think in 2014, that Putin first gave an indication that he'd got tired of the West and he didn't trust the West, and that West was essentially Russia's enemy. And that was, the end of the sort of attempt to court Russia and bring it on board as part of, the global community. And from then on, things went downhill. Yes, you're right. It is a very big event, and it is a place now where we're looking to see whether America is still on board with Europe or not, whether there's any chance of a healing of this great breach that seems to have happened, particularly over the past year, or not. And I rather fear the answer is not.
Yes, so do I. But although Marco Rubio is certainly more friendly than J.D. Vance, but I mean, Alice, we can't avoid looking at the Munich Security Conference through our own domestic politics. So the British press may well be concerned with the security situation, but they'll also be looking for signs about whether Keir Starmer is crawling back up the ladder or continuing to slide down it.
Yeah, I mean, prime ministers who are in trouble quite often like to go and strut around on the world stage. It's actually a more comfortable arena for them than back in domestic politics. But look, Starmer's still in dreadful trouble. I mean, he's had this has been the most perilous week of his premiership. I think a lot of us genuinely thought on Monday that he might have to step down. The cabinet have sort of rallied round him for now, but I think basically they want him to be a kind of human shield to absorb the ongoing fallout from the Mandelson scandal and whatever's going to happen in this Gorton and Denton by-election and in the locals. So there's blood in the water. His rivals are circling, and I think his time is up.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about all the domestic woes that Keir Starmer is facing. He overruled senior officials in order to sack Cabinet Secretary Chris Wormold and approve a £250,000 redundancy payout. Wormold indeed learned of his dismissal via the media, whilst the woman that Starmer plans to replace him with, Antonia Romeo, has been accused of bullying by her former boss, Lord MacDonald. Now, I was listening to the radio this morning, and it really does cut through, I think, this sacking of the Permanent Secretary for two reasons. One is he was only appointed a year ago, Alice. And secondly, he is getting this gargantuan payout. And most people say, why get paid £250,000 for a job you've done for a year?
Yeah, I think people will be frustrated about that. I'm not sure how much cut through it does have. I mean, who actually knows who a cabinet secretary is or what he does? What I think is kind of striking about this is that just last week, Keir Starmer was kind of clutching his pearls when Kemi Badenoch suggested that perhaps the cabinet secretary might not be the right person to supervise the releasing of these Mandelson files, like she was somehow impugning the civil service, and now he sacked him. It's ridiculous. He's clearly throwing all of his officials under the bus in order to try and save himself. I think lots of people would say that Chris Wormold was a bad appointment in the first place because he's a kind of grey blob man, not the sort of person you want if you want to see through a programme of radical change. And by contrast, I think this Antonia Romeo woman sounds quite fabulous, actually. I think she, there was a quote that I read about her. It was like, all you need to know about Antonia is that she has a mocked-up Vogue cover with her own face on it. So she sounds like a fellow
do you know anyone
vain
else
woman
who has a mocked-up Vogue cover with their face on it, Alice?
I have one.
You're kidding me.
I do. I think
Is this a thing you can buy in one of those sort of tatty shops on Oxford Street?
No, I got given it by colleagues at a former job that I left. But I think it's great. I think this is what you need. I think she sounds like a bit of a bullbuster. She's been in the Home Office doing quite a good job with Shabana Mahmood. She sounds glab and she sounds fab. She sounds like the opposite of a grey blob man.
Talking about grey blob men,
You're coming to me now.
Michael
Yes.
Binyon, let's stand up. Should we stand up to Alice?
Yes.
I mean,
Why
so
should-
far,
I
the
agree.
Alys Denby job description for the most important civil servant in the country is she's glam and she's fabulous.
Glam and fab
she's
has been
on the cover of Vogue.
Yes.
No,
yes.
I
mean,
also said
come
she's
on.
been in the Home Office.
I mean,
she's been
please.
doing a
Well,
good job.
she's been accused of
Let's
bullying.
get back to normal politics.
She's been accused of bullying, which is not so good. And that's rather extraordinary that you get one civil servant, former civil servant, bad-mouthing another one. I mean, what's happened to the civil service? They're meant to be sort of there quietly in the background, getting the government's programme done and in action. And instead, they're sort of rather publicly parading their differences and their squabbles, and it's becoming politicised. And you sort of think, well, what's going on? You know, what's happened to the good old civil service that, you know, Sir Humphrey used to run so efficiently?
Absolutely. I went to see Yes, Prime Minister last night, which launched, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about Jim Hacker being drummed out of his college.
He's in retirement now, isn't he?
He's in
Yes.
retirement in his college and he's being drummed out for politically incorrect comments. But Michael, despite us both being white blobby males, we should, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's necessarily performative to say it's quite important that we have our first woman as a head of the civil service.
Yes, I think that's good. And I mean, it sounds by all accounts as though she's pretty well qualified, and certainly, yes, she does sound quite feisty. And if she's worked with Shabana Mahmood, that's the only bit of the government at the moment that seems to be actually doing things. So that's quite good news. And maybe she will try to get the civil service to be more kind of effective in putting forward or implementing some of the vague ideas that have come out from the government for how to get Britain moving, and that would be in itself a good thing.
I mean, reluctantly, I've got to agree with you, Alice, because I know Antonia Romeo a bit, and I think her biggest crime, from what I can work out, is that she's relatively normal. And she sort of goes to events and she talks to you like a normal person. And there are perhaps too many kind of grey civil servants who don't get out there and network, frankly. Networking is important, knowing people is important, putting two and two together and making four is important. So she could be quite a good appointment.
Yeah, let's hope so. And there's also a lot of accusations, particularly from Labour women, that Keir Starmer runs Downing Street as a bit of a boys' club. So I think he's clearly doing this as a kind of antidote to that impression that he's given. But look, I don't think it's great to have a woman in this job, but let's not be tokenistic about it. You want to have the right person in the job. And I think from what you're saying...
Does that include getting away from the civil servants and appointing people from the outside? I mean, I bumped into the chief executive of Iceland, who's just joined the House of Lords. Shouldn't we be appointing a few senior business people as senior civil servants?
Yeah, I mean, one thing this government is sorely lacking is any kind of business experience at all. There's no one in the cabinet who's ever run a business. I think they could definitely do with more outside advice. But I think it's easy to complain about the civil servants like a sort of bad workman blaming his tools. You know, we've had radical governments that have pushed through change and, you know, radical agendas with the civil service as it's currently set up. Thatcher was able to do it, Blair was able to do it. What you really need is political leadership. And I know there's a lot of frustration that the civil service often acts as a blob, as a block. But I think, you know, that there's no excuse for poor political leadership.
It is true, Michael. It's sort of 6 of one and a half dozen of the other, isn't it? On the one hand, I do think it's bizarre that we still have this kind of Victorian civil service where people start aged, 23, become a jack of all trades and end up running one of the most complex organisations in the world. But on the other hand, I think Alice is absolutely right. It's too often bad ministers who can't make decisions or change their minds who end up messing things up, not the civil servants.
Exactly, yes. One of the criticisms has been that the civil service is very stable and very permanent, so that people don't get outside experience. As you say, they start at 23 and they go on from one department to another and end up as permanent undersecretary or whatever. And there have been lots of attempts to bring outsiders in. It doesn't always work. I mean, the idea of having an experienced businessman come and join the civil service at the age of 45 or whatever, fine in principle, but, they don't quite get how the thing works, how the sort of instrument, how the machine works. And it hasn't been spectacularly successful when they've tried. I mean, what matters is what direction they're given. And if the politicians have no sense of direction at all, then nothing much can be done.
Well, I think we do have an example of where it's been successful, which was the vaccine rollout, when, of course, they got outside people, they got Kate Bingham in, and that was extremely successful.
Yes,
so it can work.
That was a particular issue. I mean, that was medical expertise was needed. And that was, I mean, the medical crisis was what was driving all government policy at the time.
It's a very telling point, actually, because it wasn't medical expertise just that was needed. It was also financial expertise, because she's not a medical person. She's a venture capital person, and she managed to raise the right amount of funding to get the vaccine over the line.